Pirates and Patriots. How different are they really? This idea came to me after a conversation with a pirate, Captain Mayhem, when I visited him at the Pirate and Treasure Museum in St. Augustine. He said something along the lines of, maybe your founding fathers learned as much about liberty from pirate ships as they did from philosophers. So then I pictured Thomas Jefferson, studying Montesquieu with one hand while sneaking a peek at Black Bart Roberts' Articles of Agreement with the other. Some would say the idea is absurd, and yet, maybe not. Montesquieu, of course, is the philosopher everyone points to. His spirit of laws preached separation of powers like it was gospel, and the founders, Jefferson, Madison, Adams, they took notes. But here's the twist. Decades before Montesquieu's ideas made it to Philadelphia, pirates were already living a rough draft of them at sea. Captains had power in battle, but quartermasters kept them in check once the guns were quiet. Montesquieu had the theory, but pirates, they showed the practice. And that's where things get interesting. For all their rum-soaked reputations, pirates weren't just marauders. They voted, they divided spoils by contract, they set rules, and they enforced them. They even provided pensions for the wounded. In some ways, their ships were more democratic than the empires chasing them down. Now, I'm not here to prove the founders copied their homework from pirates, but I am here to share a few facts that might make you wonder. Because in a world where piracy was everywhere, the line between outlaw ships and revolutionary ideas might get a little fuzzy. So imagine, you're stepping aboard a pirate brig in 1720. The deck sticky with tar, the air is heavy with salt, sweat, and gunpowder. The crew is scarred, sunburned, missing probably more than a few fingers. They're armed to the teeth, and believe it or not, they're about to hold an election. Unlike the Royal Navy, where captains barked orders by divine commission and flogged the men senseless for any reason, pirate captains were chosen. They were voted in. And if the crew didn't like them, voted out. Sometimes quite literally at the point of a pistol. Captain Charles Johnson, who chronicled pirates in 1724, described this very bluntly. He said, "Every man has a vote in affairs of moment." But here's the kicker. Power didn't stay with the captain forever. In battle, yes, he commanded absolutely. But once the smoke cleared, authority shifted. The quartermaster, who was elected separately, then took over. He was the check and balance, the watchdog ensuring the captain didn't hog treasure or abuse authority. So long before Montesquieu's spirit of laws was circulating in the colonies, pirates were already splitting power between leaders. And then there were the Articles. Every crewman, from the fiercest gunner to the greenest swabby, had to sign them. These weren't polite mission statements, they were binding contracts. Bartholomew Roberts, known as Black Bart, the most successful pirate of his age, drafted a code that survives to this day. And when you put his and other pirate articles next to our revolutionary documents, the similarities jump off the page. Let's start with the right to vote. First, from Bartholomew Roberts' articles. Every man has a vote in affairs of moment. Every man has equal title to the provisions and liquors. Now, from the Declaration of Independence. Governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Same sentiment, no rule without consent. On checks and balances and leadership, let's start with Bart Roberts' ship. The captain commanded absolutely in battle, but otherwise decisions rested with the quartermaster and the crew. Captains who grew too cruel or too cowardly could be voted out. The Patriot Principle. Power divided among president, legislature, and courts. No monarchs allowed. Both feared the same thing, tyranny, whether it wore a crown or strutted about in the captain's coat. When it came to the division of wealth, Roberts' pirate article said, the captain is to have 2 shares of a prize, the quartermaster 1.5, every other officer proportionally, the rest equal. Versus the Continental Congress's initial pay scale for the military. Officers were promised higher pay, yes, but common soldiers were guaranteed rations, clothing, and eventually pensions. So whether on a brigantine or in an army camp, the rule held. Leaders might earn more, but the common man must never be forgotten. On Care for the Wounded, a pirate article on Robert's ship was that, if any man lose a limb or become a cripple in the service, he is to have 800 pieces of 8 out of the public stock. On Henry Morgan's ship, it was 600 pieces of 8 for a leg, 100 for a finger. The Continental Congress decided there would be half pay or pensions for wounded soldiers. The Outlaw Deck and the Continental Congress both agreed on one thing: if you bled for the cause, you deserved to be cared for. On discipline and morality, pirate articles from Robert's ship said, no person is to game at cards or dice for money, lights out at 8 o'clock, and if any remain drinking, they shall do it on the open deck. From Edward Lowe's ship, it was straight out, none shall game for money at dice or cards. And General Washington's Continental Army orders banned gambling and drunkenness. In Congress, John Adams thundered against vice, calling it poison to the Republican virtue. Strange as it sounds, the pirate and the Puritan stood on common ground. Liberty could not survive without discipline. On justice for theft, from the pirate world, if any man defrauds the company to the value of $1, he shall be marooned. Versus the Patriot Continental Army Articles of War that said, death for theft of military stores, court-martials for fraud or cowardice. Pirate justice was quick and brutal. Patriot justice was formal and legalistic, but also brutal. And both treated betrayal of the common trust as the gravest of crimes. On brotherhood and unity, the pirate custom on both Robert's and Lowe's ships was, new recruits had to swear to the articles before joining by signing their names or just making their mark on the contract. And for the Patriots, well, they had the Articles of Confederation in 1781, which was a firm league of friendship among the states, swearing common defense and mutual obligation. Pirate ships and Patriot states both knew they needed contracts of loyalty. Now let's look at the people in the ranks. First, a little bit of pirate history. Most pirates weren't born criminals, they were deserters from the Royal Navy or merchant sailors sick of abuse, often men just tired of starvation wages. And when they turned pirate, they built something that felt fairer. And who were the colonists in 1776? People sick of monarchy's heavy hand, tired of being bossed, taxed, and flogged economically by Britain. Sound familiar? The Founding Fathers didn't live in a vacuum, they lived in an Atlantic world steeped in piracy. From Boston to Charleston, pirate stories were local news. Edward Teach, Blackbeard, terrorized Carolina waters in 1718. Stede Bonnet, the gentleman pirate, was captured and hanged in Charleston. Boston held pirate trials and hangings of its own. Benjamin Franklin, as a young printer, published broadsheets about pirate executions. Colonists, they bought pirate loot. Cheap rum, stolen sugar, smuggled textiles, sometimes knowingly, sometimes not. It kept prices low. Half the town might have been drinking contraband punch on a Sunday night. And Britain called colonial smugglers piratical long before independence. John Hancock, the Boston merchant extraordinaire, made a fortune in the gray market. His sloop Liberty was seized in 1768 for smuggling Madeira wine. To the crown, that was piracy. To colonists, it was business. So when Britain labeled rebels outlaws in 1775, it wasn't a new insult. Colonists had lived under that accusation for decades. And then Congress blurred the lines even further in the beginning of the Revolution. Congress, broke and desperate, had maybe a handful of ships worth calling a navy. Britain had hundreds. So what do? You call the pirates, or at least their cousins. Congress issued letters of marque, licenses to private ship owners. With a seal on parchment, ordinary merchants could become legal predators. They could seize British ships, drag them into port, and let prize courts decide their fate. The profits were split. Owners, officers, sailors, all by the rules. Privateering was piracy with more paperwork. Pirates plundered and divided on deck. Privateers plundered, then waited on a judge's decree. Same result. Cargo auctioned, crews paid, but one was outlaw and the other was lawful warfare. And a lot of people were happy to blur those lines. From Maine to the Chesapeake, hundreds of privateers took to the sea. Some captured dozens of prizes in a season. They wrecked British trade, spooked insurers, and brought in vital goods. To Britain, they were pirates. To America, they were patriots with commissions. The truth, they were both. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe the colonists, steeped in a world where pirate democracy was whispered and witnessed, recognized that even villains had tested self-rule on the waves. Now, before we hang too much bunting on the Jolly Roger, let's be clear. Pirate democracy was exclusive. Women not allowed. Africans sometimes treated as crew, sometimes enslaved. And their freedom came at a price. Stolen cargo, ruined merchants, dead sailors. They weren't noble revolutionaries, they were predators who occasionally stumbled into progressive policies. Think of it this way. Pirates might have been the messy rehearsal, and the founders might have been the main event. So, did Jefferson keep Black Bart's articles in his desk drawer? Probably not. But did colonists live in a world that was shaped by pirate codes, smuggling, privateering, and the blurred line between outlaw and patriot? Absolutely. Britain called us pirates. We called ourselves patriots. The truth is, we were something in between. Rebels testing like pirates before us, whether men could govern themselves by consent and contract rather than by crown. And maybe, just maybe, the bright banner of independence carried a few black threads of the Jolly Roger woven into its stars and stripes. Because liberty, like piracy, is dangerous, thrilling, and a little unruly.